right, good evening, everybody. Howdy ho, good to see you back. Well, put these away. We are going to be in, I'll just recap just very briefly, 19 to carry us on into 20. Brent was supposed to be with you tonight, but there's some sickness in the family, so they're just staying home and taking care of that. And so we'll be diving into 19 and 20, and that'll be our time for this evening, at least through most of 20, I would think. So that's going into the Ten Commandments, and look forward to looking through that tonight. Well, let's go ahead and hop into a little bit of introduction to get us on the same page. Tell me at least one thing that you remember from Brent Sunday morning. I love this. It's like my favorite part of class right here. Give me one thing that you remember for Sunday. We all know that. Better teacher, better looking, definitely taller than me. Yeah, I know. It's hard to believe. I know. But I didn't want you to forget. So it was chapter 19 in Moses and Sinai. Give me something that you remember. Say again. Absolutely. So we're going into this part where he needed help, and this is him learning that he needs help, and it's going into all this and going up and speaking to the Lord, and kind of this whole idea of you're at the bottom of the mountain, and what are you supposed to do before the Lord comes on the mountain? What are you supposed to do? Cleanse yourself. You're supposed to purify yourself. You don't approach the Lord without preparation in your heart and also physically. And so physically and spiritually there to get ready for God to come down and His presence to be there. Let me begin there in chapter 19, verse 1. I'm just going to kind of take you through so that it's easy to get all these things tonight. Chapter 19, verse 1. In the third month after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. When they set out from Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. And there Israel camped in front of the mountain. Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself." We had a lot of conversation about that Sunday morning. Verse 5, "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel." Just kind of want to camp on that for a minute and get us all up to speed again. So he's there, he goes up. Verse 3, I want to kind of point this out because it's something that you see time and time in the Bible. After this, so notice that it's not that the Lord just is giving us geographic locations without any purpose behind it, okay? This is something that we should catch on here because it keeps going. So it says he's going where? I'm just going to make you repeat the obvious, but where does it say he's going? Somebody? Anybody? Everybody at once, I hope. He's going up the mountain. Thank you. I'm going to do it one more time. He's going up the mountain. And the reason I want you to identify that is because it's not only saying up the mountain, as in this is where he's going, as if we don't know what a mountain is and where you'd have to travel to go up it. The point behind it is showing that to approach the Lord, that He's not on level. That if we want to approach the Lord, then we go to Him, right? And He's going to meet us there, but we have to go to meet Him, which is also the part where it says, "Indeed, if you will obey my voice and keep my commandments, then," right? So we're not playing on this playing ground that says we can live however we want. God, you save us from people, but we do whatever we want. Going up is honoring God, going to Him because He is higher than us, and this continues to play. If you haven't already noticed this, if you don't already know this, kind of stick this in your back pocket as you read your Bible. When we keep going through the Old Testament and even in the Gospels, we see that they travel up to Jerusalem. But that's a curious statement that it says up to, because sometimes when it says up to, they're in Galilee. And if you're thinking about Galilee in the north and south is Jerusalem, why would they be going up? On a mountain. It's elevation. It's not only elevation, it's elevation in the presence of the Lord in the temple. And so there's a lot of times throughout the Old and New Testament, you'll notice and identify going up to. That's even actually used in regard to idol worship as well, because you're going up to the high place. And the high place should only be where you're worshiping the Lord, but obviously there's plenty of places in the land of Canaan where they're going up and building high places for their altars to their idols. And so just something to look at there. I think it's a mindset that we're supposed to be getting as we're beginning to read 19, that this is who God is, this is who we are. If we want His blessings, then we listen to Him, right? And so that's just a piece of there. There's something else I want to point out from verse 6 that I want to connect that was said a little bit in the invitation earlier. But hopefully nobody heard any of that and you'll act like it's the first time you've ever heard it. But in verse 6 there, you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This is what you're supposed to speak to the whole nation. Let's kind of talk about that for a minute. What do we think that means? What are we trying to imply? What's God want from them? Are there any connections? I just want us to kind of sit in that for a moment. What's going on in verse 6 when God says, go tell them I want a kingdom of priests? Thoughts on that? All right. So, could you read that for us?
But now you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who has called you out of darkness into His marvelous light.
Right. 1 Peter 2:9. So, a lot of us are well versed in hearing that. We're being drawn out of darkness into light. What did they get drawn out of? Darkness, slavery, and even actual darkness. You remember that was one of the plagues that didn't affect them, and they were given light while the rest of everybody else in Egypt was given darkness. Okay? So let's just sit on 1 Peter 2:9 for a moment. This should be an easy discussion. We should be able to talk about this for a minute. So what does that mean to us? What's the good Bible class answers for what that means to the church and Christianity today? Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Let's break it down. I want you to keep going. I want you to break it down. He says, priests are a go-between. So you have people that are in need of the Lord, and you've got the Lord who can give salvation, and the priests are going in the intermediary. Okay. Keep going. Okay, so if they're the intermediaries, they're the ones that are the go-between. And then what we just were talking about was the fact that as Christians, the church, we are supposed to be the people that are between those that have not heard, that are lost, that are disbelieving, and connect them. And you might also go to the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, and that's the idea that Jesus is presenting when He says salt and light. It's not, you just go be good people. It's so much deeper than that. It's, you be this type of people. We'll expand on that in just a moment. Go ahead. Absolutely. Sure. Both until the time of Jesus. Absolutely. It is unique. And what is unique to connect that is, so, okay, we've talked about the New Testament reference. Let's put it all back in perspective. Verse 6, so we've been talking about Jesus and the connection to Melchizedek, and we've been talking about what a priest is, but we've been talking in the New Testament mainly. But verse 6, let's go back. What is it specifically that the Lord said, tell Israel I want them to be this? What did He want Israel to be? I'm going to start like calling out people. Say again. A holy nation. That's the whole nation. Everybody, he wanted all in Israel to be a kingdom of priests, or the same as Matthew chapter 5, the same thing as what Peter says. He wants the whole nation to be a people that go and affect the other nations for his glory. Instead, they go into the wilderness. Later, they cross the Jordan and go into the land of Canaan. And who affects whom? Does the nation affect Canaan, or does Canaan affect Israel? So they failed. This is why we have Jesus. Here is one of the first times you're beginning to see that they are going to be able to fail the job that the Lord asked them to do. I want you to be a kingdom of priests. It doesn't say here that I just want the bloodline of Aaron. It seems to be that I want everybody the same way that he wants us or the church to be that. But they can't be that. We'll talk about why as we continue on through our study tonight. But he wants them to all be this. They can never be, and they didn't even try really hard to be in the wilderness or in the land of Canaan. It's unfortunate. And so that's why we have to have the establishment of Aaron and the priest line and carry that on, because they're sinful as well. They have to cover up their own sins before they cover up the sins of the people, especially on the Day of Atonement, until Jesus can come through and be all the things that Abraham couldn't be, the fathers couldn't be, the nation couldn't be, the kings couldn't be, any of the judges, anything. And so this is just a very pivotal point of Scripture here that lets us know what God desires and how we failed it, and why it all keeps needing to go forward into the story until the time of Jesus. So it's all this purity language, all of this, and then that brings us all the way. Let me just kind of break this down again. Let's move forward to verse 21. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down, warn the people, so that they do not break through to the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. Also let the priests," now I want to cover that for a second, "who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, or else the Lord will break out against them. Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, set bounds about the mountain and consecrate it. Then the Lord said to him, go down and come up again, you and Aaron with you, but do not let the priest and the people break through to come up to the Lord, or he will break forth upon them. So Moses went down to the people and told them. Thoughts on the Lord just said, tell them I want them all to be priests. And then he says, then Moses is writing and says, and the priests could not come up with the people. But the priests haven't been identified yet. Any thoughts on that? Yes, sir.
They thought they was better than everybody else.
That's right.
And they did not deserve to have it.
That's right.
They felt that always with history.
Especially once they got in the land of Canaan, Joshua takes them on these battles, and they're like, look at what we can do, right?
They thought themselves higher than
That's right. And 'tis is the problem that continues until this day, right? So, yes, sir. Okay, I think there's two ideas, and keep going, so I think this is one.
It's kind of like Barnabas and Paul when they were traveling.
Sure. They
were sent, and they were called apostles.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a different sense in which the word apostles used. So I think there's probably a different sense here. And the reason that we're going to see God establish a new priesthood is because it's going to be a reset. Because they've already got it.
There you go.
And we just don't know how they're called,
right.
We don't even know how they're cleansed.
Sure.
Because here he says they need to get
cleansed before they can even serve.
Yeah, so I just don't think that, I think it's more of a generic sense of priest.
Right, those that lead, those that help some type of worship, things of that nature. Anybody have another idea of why it would be saying priest here? So, go ahead. Yeah, please.
in verse 6,
Mm-hmm.
Shall be, and so it's not saying that they currently are.
Sure.
They will become,
Sure.
at least in the English translation.
Yeah.
And so, reading verse,
Then what, over at the end?
yeah, 21 and 22.
Sure.
Maybe it could just be either those who were already priests when they were in Egypt, or it could just be maybe this idea of priests being those that bring people to God or teach others about God in a general sense.
Absolutely.
And those maybe who are clearly faithful and haven't been
The difference.
or doubting, like there's maybe some kind of separation among who they know, like they're still listening to Moses.
Agreed. And I'll jump off of your point there because to me, one of two things, and you don't have to be either, I just want you to know because I don't want to just pass over this and not at least give it some attention because I don't want you to read this or be like, what is this? Have confusion. You know, this is one of those places where non-believers want to cherry pick and say, see, there's things that contradict themselves. And either A, it's something that is, but it's not fully yet. It's going to be redone after the commandments are given and reset and they're cleansed for that service. But it could also be, as was rightly pointed out in verse 6, it said, shall be. So not yet could also something that, and I lean towards this one a little bit, but either way, is the fact that when this is getting written is not in real time. Okay? I've already pointed that out earlier in other parts of Scriptures where Moses and whoever is helping him to write this is writing it after it happened. Okay? This is a big thing. I could go into it. I won't. As far as where it's the location of where the Israelites were in Egypt. It's a big confusion on the timeline. It says Ramses, but it's most likely it wasn't called Ramses when they were there, but since it's getting written later, then they're writing about the current facts. So it could simply be saying, I want you all to be priests, and here he's just calling later those that are priests, even them, the ones that are priests now, were not allowed then to go up. Either way, it's not a big deal which way you lean because it's not clearly specified, but I want to give it attention so that we don't think, that's weird. Is there a difference there? Is there some contradictory statement? Yes, ma'am.
In Revelation
Uh-huh.
1:6, it says, to him who loves us and has freed us from sins by his blood and made us a kingdom of priests to God the Father, to him be glory and dominion.
Absolutely. So now,
It's mentioned in
absolutely. And something that he wants us always to be, whether then or now. And so there's a lot more to say about priests but we'll get to that later in Exodus and Leviticus. So we'll keep that in the purification to that point. Just one final thing that I want to point out, and for the sake of time, I won't go tonight, but if you want to write it down or jot it somewhere, Deuteronomy chapter 32. Of course, that's pushing forward in the storyline. Deuteronomy 32 is one of the final things that Moses is going to say before he departs and Joshua takes him across the river. But something I think is very important to just identify here is we're seeing the kind of beginning of the covenant being established, and if you bookend that with what is said by Moses at the end, you see what is very important is to realize who gave you the salvation and to respect him and act accordingly. And you would say, well, yeah, that's pretty understood, but it's not. They walked through the Red Sea and can't even say thank you and live for the Lord. To us today, we come to the waters of baptism and go through that as they go through water, and then we come out, as Jim rightly said, and later we think that we're more special and think that we don't necessarily need God the same way they thought they didn't need the Lord. It's important to identify what their issues were and how we don't need to repeat the mistakes from the past. Moses, before he exits the scene, reminds them, remember who gave you salvation. Remember to live in such a way that respects him and fears him, and continue to be a light to all the nations and be a priest to all the nations. Again, all the connections that Jesus comes and brings again, just in his covenant, right? So just something to identify there to get in our heads as we move forward into these commandments. Yes, sir.
Can I piggyback off of
Please.
what was taught just for a second?
Yeah.
Here we see that
Do you have a reference for us?
the people here, when they see the signs that God is there,
Sure.
scares them to death.
Sure.
They're afraid of it.
Yeah.
And I've come across several folks who are struggling with loving God,
Mm.
but being fearful of it. And one of them said, you know, God is called my father. And my earthly father, I was afraid of him
Sure.
because he harmed me physically
Or emotionally.
And there is a struggle sometimes when we have reason to fear God, and not in the sense that I'm in awe of him, but
Sure.
if God, he's got the power to do whatever he wants. If he's going to punish me, he can really do it.
Yeah.
And I need to fear that. But most people don't look for the good in what God is doing, and they don't think through, if he says don't do something, it's always for our best interest.
Yeah.
And sometimes we may not see how it's our best interest, but because
Or we might not even want it.
the ponderance of evidence is that it is for our good.
Sure.
So the one or two times that I can't work it out, I've got to trust him. And that's how it's like when you're growing up. You're little, you're afraid to do what's wrong because you know your parents will discipline you.
Absolutely.
But as you get older, you begin to understand why they're saying not to do something. And you fall in love with it.
Absolutely.
Because they love you so much that they don't want you to get hurt.
That's right.
And that's how we have to deal with fearing God is not necessarily that we're so afraid. We just don't want to let him down. We don't want to do what's wrong because we know he does punish those who do
Sure.
evil. But he's gone to such great lengths to have us overcome our shortcomings by giving us Jesus.
Absolutely.
That our love and our fear goes beyond just my knees are buckling
That's right.
to I am falling on my knees because of how great
Because.
you are.
Well, let's keep going down that path since you brought that up, because that's already on my to-do list anyway, and that'll be a great segue. So, again, I want to reiterate, and just in case you could not hear, Steve's just talking about how we should absolutely fear. That is a necessary part and for them and for us, but how some, and thank you for saying that, because I'm sure there's somebody here tonight that struggles with the how do you fear and love at the same time? Because, you know, there's unfortunate situations where perhaps we feared, we say fathers, but it could be either, a parent. We fear authority over us or whoever is raising us at the time, and perhaps because of our fear, it's hard forever to love them because we just see them as somebody to not disappoint so they don't punish us. And I 100% agree that we should fear. Roger's absolutely correct. You cannot have a relationship with the Lord without fear, right? I always go back to this because I think it helps us to put it in its proper zone. What child is going to come up in being respectful of God, respectful of authority, be a good, decent person if when they're small they don't have some fear at some point of their parents or whoever is raising them? However, hopefully by age, I don't know, whatever it is, let's just 16, 18, 21, if we're still in that mode of I just fear, then how is the relationship going to be between that child or teenager or young adult and the father or mother? How is that relationship going to be? Terrible, honestly, right? There's going to be some things they're going to need. They're going to need some encouragement, maybe some help, some medical help. There's a lot of things that are going to need. Instead, what we hope is that we tell them, fear us in our commandments because we want what's good for you. But as you grow, it has to go from also the fear, but in love, just like Jesus, and let me prove that to you here as well. Here's a connection I want you to see. 19 and 6. You shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. Okay? At the end of chapter 19, the Lord comes down in the smoke and the thunder, and they see all these things. And the Lord rightly wants them to have a sense of fear as He comes down on the mountain so that His children can be tested. It says that. They can be tested whether they're going to trust Him or not. And let's just go, we're going to come back to the commandments, but this is a great way to kind of get into this anyway. Look in chapter 20, and let's begin there in verse 18. All the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. So there's the fear. Verse 19. Then they said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But let not God speak to us, or we will die." Okay, let's just pause before we continue. Just for discussion purposes tonight. In verse 19, when it says, "Speak to us yourself, but don't let God, because we'll die," do you think that's a healthy, good response? Or not? I'm not trying to trap anybody. I just honestly want to know and flesh this out to what is the purpose of this statement. Do you think that is healthy for them to have this, yes or no, or why? Yes? Any yeses? Any no's? Any I don't knows? Yeah? Okay, so I agree. So in that point, God wants to have fear, but it's not so that the rest of their life is spent in that, because how do I know that? Look at verse 20. Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid." Where was that Sunday morning? "Do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you," not tempt, okay, we'll talk about that, "and in order that the fear of Him may remain with you, so that you may not sin." So the people stood at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. So, what was the purpose of the Lord coming down in the fashion that He did? What you just said, Tyler. Say it again. So, they know who He is, who they are, and He's on the mountain. He's the one that you can see His glory. And you're down at the mountain, and you're supposed to be purified and waiting for the Holy One to come down. But He says to test. How is this a test? Let's talk about this for a moment. How in the world is God coming down, smoke and thunder, a test for them? Please. Okay. All right. Thank you for saying over and over again, because He does, and He still needs to for us. I'm with you. I don't think there's a separation in that. The reason you give a test is to train and to encourage and for growth. Okay. Let's just keep going. Yes, ma'am. Okay, and who else? Who else learns from that? Okay.
You know, just like a test that you take
Mm-hmm.
at school,
Mm-hmm.
it shows your progress or where you are. So what does the teacher have to hit the next time?
Okay. Okay, so the teacher learns what you got right or wrong, but who else learns who got things right or wrong when you receive your test back? You do. Keep going. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. All of it. Yes, sir. Do you have something? There you go. There you go. It's that's the fear that we have to have in us. It's if I do not, there is no blessing. There is nothing, right? If I do not, there's no salvation. There's only the consequence. That doesn't make God an evil God. That's what people want to perceive, and yet we go home and immediately spank, ground, or take something away from children. And it's like, where does it go? How do we look at God and say, He can't punish them, what a mean God, and then go and punish children? It's the same thing. You don't punish because you hate and you're mean. You punish because you love. Actually, if you don't care about your children, and unfortunately there are many parents out there, and people have to get involved with these families, what happens when parents don't care about their children? Just let them go wild. There are no rules. There are no consequences because they don't care. There's no fear. There's nothing there. So the fear is there to start the relationship, as is written. But then it continues on for the testing, for the training, and as was said, so that they can know who will provide. It's not I want to scare you. It's respect who I am, know your place, and know that I provide for you, not the other way around. Yes, sir? Yep. Yep. Try. Mm-hmm. Yep. Agreed. And the rules save us, not the Lord. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's something that plays out here, is going to play out as Moses, as later we record when he's up getting the commandments, right? And they're going to do everything that he's telling them not to do here. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. That you may not sin. Teaching.
And this came from a mentor of mine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as a follower of Christ, you're going to have this wholesome fear
Mm-hmm.
of displeasing your Father.
Mm-hmm.
If you're living in sin, yeah, you need to be afraid.
Yes.
But if you're living for Him, you're going to have this fear of displeasing. There's kind of two different fears.
Yes, sir.
And
I agree. Yes, sir. The fear is to bring you back. It's to bring you into repentance, into the right relationship. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that's good for us to look at Him coming down, what He wants from them, what He desires for them. The reason that He tests is because He wants a relationship. Remember what He asked. I want you to be royal priest. Okay, He knows that's not going to work. He knows that they're going to say, no, we don't want to be, because we don't even want to be in His presence. So here, remember this. He doesn't say then, the Lord doesn't say, then nobody is allowed in my presence, all of you depart. He doesn't say that. He says, okay, I'm going to work with what I have. We're going to give this test so I know where you're at, you know where you're at, but I'm going to invite Moses up. Because I want somebody to be in a relationship and to be with me. And then He can bring it back down so that I can bring the rest of them into a relationship. They just keep refusing to be in the relationship with Him. And then even those that come into the relationship with Him at Sinai and after, we still fail and fail and fail until Jesus comes. He's the only one that could accomplish all of the things. And that's why Jesus has to come, because all the people He keeps picking over, gives them the shot, but they just cannot fulfill all the things. All right? So let's talk a little bit. How about we do this? How about we go ahead and just give a brief overview of the commandments, and it'll be great timing for us to cover them in a little bit more depth Sunday morning, and then go on and we probably won't go as in depth. I'm just going to be honest with you. Chapters 21, 22, and 23, these are some of the ordinances and the things that are on top of the 10. But I do want to address them, but I won't promise you that I will necessarily get in the weeds on all of those ordinances. But let's go ahead and, at least with the time that we have, just identify one very important thing that will set us up for going deeper. How about I go ahead and read the commandments, and let's just catch something with our time left, all right? So chapter 20, let's begin in verse 1. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land. See how he always reminds them? Out of the house of slavery. You shall have no gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Verse 12, honor your father and mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. All right, with the few minutes that we have left there, here's what I want to ask, and homework to give you that we can discuss more Sunday morning, Lord willing. Okay, I'm going to ask an obnoxiously easy question. Please bear with me. How many commandments are there? That took way too long. How many commandments are there? Thank you. Okay, slightly harder, not really. Out of 10, how many are specific to how we, the people, interact with the holy God? Verse 4. Strange. How many are how we, the human, interact with other image bearers? Yet, we spend most of our time speaking of following the Lord in Christianity today as what we do, here you go, what we do here, and it doesn't really matter what we do here to our brothers and sisters or to the outsiders. But yet, I started in 19 because I wanted all the context to be there for you. The context is I want you to, as Roger said, be priests that make a difference in the world. You couldn't do it. All right, let's try again. With Jesus and the church. The church, I want you to be people that make a difference in the world. And so we can't be followers of Lord and say, I love you, I'll do the you things, but this part, don't like that one because that one's harder. Yeah, it's harder because we are all sinners. And it's hard to love sinners. It's hard to deal with people that have different backgrounds, different opinions. But that doesn't give us the right to say, but I'll do 4. I don't know about the 6. And so here's your homework. Take home Matthew 22, 36 through 40. Matthew 22, 36 through 40. And let's bring that back up Sunday morning, and let's dive deeper into each commandment and why the Lord specifically gave these. And we'll try to make those connections to the law that Jesus gives as well. Thank y'all so much. Looking forward to the rest of the breakdown of these commandments Sunday morning. Hope y'all have a great rest of your week.